Meanwhile, President Bola Tinubu says ECOWAS will continue to persuade the military leaders of Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso to return their nations to the fold. President Tinubu, who is the chairman of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government, reaffirmed his position at a meeting with ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense Staff in Abuja.
And sisters from West African countries, the Chiefs of Defense Staff, we've been holding meetings since about 2 days now. Today is the third day, to deliberate on the security situation within our sub-region. I think the idea is to see how we can enhance security working together, because the challenges we're facing is no one country or one nation that can tackle it alone. So we need to work together as a team, and that's the importance. That's why we're here. After the meeting, we came to see Mr. President, who is also the chairman of ECOWAS, to inform him on our deliberations and to get his blessing. To also appreciate him for making it possible for us to be here to sit and deliberate. And so you can see we're all from West Africa, and our deliberations have been fruitful.
Well, for this conversation around ECOWAS, we are now being joined by an African affairs analyst, Achike Chude, who will be in the Abuja studio shortly, as well as astute public affairs analyst, Dr. Victor Okhai, who is here with us in the Lagos studio. They both will be sharing their perspective on the politics of ECOWAS and the polity in the disgruntled member states of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Let's begin with Dr. Okhai. It's good to have you with us on the show.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Okhai.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Now let's begin with the impact of the Sahel region, the insecurity, or rather the instability, political instability in the Sahel region, how it has impacted how it has influenced the refugee crisis in Africa.
Okay, so after what happened in Libya, we know that that particular incident when Gaddafi was overthrown and then the country just was thrown overboard, there was, this free flow of small arms, the proliferation of small arms across, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, the Sahel region, and West Africa generally. And with the influx of ISWAP, and all the other insurgents, in the region, things have sort of affected the region in no small way, and it has swelled up the cases of internally displaced persons, not just even across borders, but even within borders, as you can witness with what happened with Boko Haram and the other attacks we have in northern Nigeria. We have internally displaced persons, and this is something you see across the entire sub-region as well, where it's no longer about people fighting themselves, but nations fighting among themselves. But you find out that people are displaced from their original settlements, and so across you just find not just refugees. We find internally displaced persons. You find migrations that are forced because of the security situation.
Yes, and so you've spoken about IDPs.
Yes.
We have that particularly in the northeast of Nigeria,
Yes.
and you've spoken about internal tensions that we're facing due to terrorism, instability, and poor governance.
Yes.
However, we also have another issue, which is outside interference from international players, particularly Russia. So now I'd like to ask you, what influence is Russia having in this crisis we're seeing with instability in Western Africa, in the Sahel region, particularly the Wagner Group that have now rebranded to African Corps? What would you say the impact is on instability in Western Africa?
First of all, let me say Wagner has been adopted and rebranded. See, we'll have to look at, there are a lot of factors we'll have to look at in analyzing this. First of all, if you look at countries like Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, and what's the other one now? I'm trying to remember.
The coast, the Gambia?
No, not the Gambia.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember the third. I'll remember in a minute. These three countries have had rulers who have been in government for over 40 years. And the oldest ruler in Africa today is the Cameroonian president, over 90 and above. And so you find, there's a lot of misgovernance, a lot of dissatisfaction among the youth. And, and a lot of these regimes have been propped up by the West. At the time after the fall of the USSR, the world became unipolar. It was just one strong, dominant force, which is the US. Now, things have changed, and we are back to what you might call a multipolar, regime or system across the world now, and which, in a way, maybe, I might not say that's entirely bad for us. And the reason being that, you see, it's like in a monopoly. When you have a monopoly, you can do whatever you want to do. And so Africa has been at the wrong end of the stick all of this while. You find resource exploitation and all of that. And with all these regimes being propped up and all that, let me even go more directly. France, that is supposed to be, that exploits some of these countries, particularly in the Sahel, these ones that have now sort of left. You take all of this from them, you send your soldiers there, and in the hope that they will protect, these countries from insurgents and attacks. And these people are there and nothing is happening.
But do you feel like after France has pulled back from countries such as Mali and Burkina Faso that their insecurity situation has gotten worse?
I can't quite say it's worse. The thing is that these countries have taken charge and they're getting external help. So it's no longer like, okay, look, somebody is like an overlord looking after your security, or you have mortgaged your security to someone. They are now in charge. They're being trained by the Russians.
But they were being trained by the French.
No, I don't know about being trained by the French. The French sent boots on the ground, supposedly to protect them, but things got worse. And so that fueled the dissatisfaction on the ground. I mean, we're going to look at this in greater details. And so they, generally, if you look at among all these countries, it's always the French, because they felt they had been shortchanged.
Yeah, but so, Africa being on the wrong end of the stick, like
yes,
you said earlier,
yes.
Would it include the mineral exploitation?
No, I mean, like I said, there are a lot of things we're going to be looking at now. So what is the interest of the West? And I say the West generally, and that includes whether you call Russia, maybe, but it's still part of Europe in a sense, even if it's midway between Asia and Europe and all that. But one thing is clear, they all have vested interests. And what is the interest? If you don't have, it's only ripe mangoes that get sticks or stones thrown at them. If you don't have anything, nobody cares about you. That's a fact, okay? What is peculiar to all of these states in this region are their resources, okay? And if you look very well, a lot of these countries in the West and Russia itself, they need this to survive. China, Russia, UK, US, France, and the rest to feed their industries and all that. And it is also in their interest for this region not to be stabilized. Okay? The reason being that they can then move in when you don't have, it's either they're propping up a government, or if a regime is too strong, they destabilize it so that they can move in and exploit.
Yes, but could those resources, could they have been like a strong negotiating power for Africa and the Sahel region to bargain, or a sort of bargaining chip with the West?
Only if you're in control. Question is, are you in control? When there's war in your territory, are you in control? Let us not go too far. Zamfara is being exploited right now. Who is in charge? Who's controlling what's happening there? We have a government in place, most respectfully. But the amount of exploitation of our resources that's taking place in that place, under the guise of banditry and all of that, you cannot put a price to it. We hear that there are planes flying in and out of Zamfara, small planes that are flying in and out, because there's a situation of anomie on ground, So that is the same. The Congo Basin is like that. That's perhaps the richest, if you like, spot on earth today. But are they in control? You cannot negotiate unless you're actually in control of your resources.
I'd like to relate what you said, because you've spoken about Zamfara gold and exploitation with the banditry.
Yes.
But we've also spoken, particularly in the Nigerian context, when we talk about exploitation, we used to talk about exploitation of the Niger Delta region, when we talk about oil.
Yes.
The issue here seems to be that minerals or natural resources are extracted from African countries, and instead of them bettering, most of the people, they're held by a few or they're taken to foreign countries.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to relate this particularly to Russia, because for me, it does sound like a bit like Francophone countries within Western Africa have exchanged one master for the other, right? In terms of who is in charge or who's benefiting, it does not seem to be the people of those nations. But when we talk about the Sahel particularly, we have also been talking about the Sahara expanding. We've been talking about climate change and the harsh conditions. Now, I want to ask you, beyond mineral exploitation, what other conditions do you think laid the ground for such insecurity to take root across the region?
Let me start with Nigeria, and I've said this a long time ago on some sessions, many years back. I've been talking about this even before people started talking about it seriously. We fail to implicate climate change in our security problems.
Yes.
If you notice, I don't know if a study has been done, but I'm sure that even as a theory it can be tested. The pressure tends to be more in the drier seasons. Before Boko Haram, what would normally happen is, when you had, I lived on the plateau. I grew up in Jos, so I know the place very well. And you know, that's at the heart, the center, between the south and the north. And that place is the land there is very, 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 very fertile. Okay, so in the dry season, what would normally happen is the Lake Chad would dry up. You know, that's a source. Some of the rivers in the north would also dry up. Now the herders, the cattle herders, would then, because naturally they will migrate, you know, and start looking for greener fodder for their cattle, and so they begin to push down. And as they move with their families, they settle, and all of that. And for them, what is most important is for their cattle to survive and not die. And if it means getting into anything green, is food. It doesn't matter if it's a farm or whatever, okay? And so naturally there is a tendency, you know, for that pressure to be there. But beyond that migration, there is actual physical migration. And when I say physical migration, not temporarily now, people actually leave, because if you look at it with satellite imaging, the Lake Chad is drying, so you find that more and more people have to move. You know, they're moving and relocating. And so where are they relocating to? The place that is greenest, which is like in the middle belt. And so when you come, then there is a conflict for land.
Yes.
Okay? And this conflict for land, and most wars, or a lot of wars, let me not just speak generally, many wars are caused by conflict for land. And that includes resources, whether they be agricultural, and so water and all of that. And so this is a major cause of conflict. Okay? So there is that, and you cannot rule it out. So there's the climate and ecological factor.
Yeah.
There are the, security factor, and you have the international factors, and because of mineral resources and all that, the selfish interests of the West. The truth is, all they want for every single one of them is what's in it for them.
But what about the laxity and the selfish interests of the government of the day, even within the African continent? Especially, you talked about the sit-tight president we've had over the years.
You see, this is the double standard of the West. When they talk about democracy, on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're propping up and elongating the regime of people. And if you say democracy, if you have a term of 4 years and you're supposed to make it 2 terms, you do that and you leave. Honestly, and observe, and that's the truth. If you take care of their interest, you can continue to do what you want and they'll turn a blind eye. Because you're a good boy, you're serving them well. But when you're stubborn and you are too smart, they take you out by whatever means necessary.
Do you have a modern or more contemporary example of that?
We have so many. Okay, we say modern, but let me talk about strong characters.
Okay.
Who was this guy in
the Congo?
No, I don't even want to go. Congo will be going far back. Okay. Lumumba, we knew what happened to him. Thomas Sankara, for instance, that was a very strong leader. Came and he would have liberated his people.
Yeah.
What happened to him? We have so many people. The thing is, as long as you're stubborn, you are not looking after their interests, you go. Nkrumah had the same issue, but that's far back. But there are And copious examples, there are enough examples in our history to prove that. But if you're a puppet, you're a good boy, you take care of the West, you look after their interests, you can remain there forever. They don't care.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think we now have Achike Chude in our Abuja studio. Good afternoon and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Achike Chude.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now we're discussing.
Thanks for having me. Good afternoon. Yeah.
We're discussing ECOWAS and we're discussing the insecurity in the Sahel region and particularly the countries that we're trying to welcome back into the ECOWAS community. And we've mentioned Russia's objectives as that of the Wagner Group. Do you agree that Russia's goal in Western Africa is essentially to secure economic objectives, or do you think that they're leveraging this for greater geopolitical power, particularly with their war in the Ukraine and as an opposing force to America, or do you believe that this is a purely economic transaction with the Wagner Group, or as they're now known, Africa Corps?
No, look, if they are trying to have a greater political impact in Africa, at the bottom of it, the motivation is always economic, and that is the primary motivation for virtually every country, especially when you operate at the international level. You are motivated primarily by economic interests. What are your interests? Not all interests are economic, but the underlying interest usually is what is in it for us, and it is usually, economy. Obviously, Russia has been, for some time now, has been trying to project strength beyond their, their territory. We have seen what they have tried to do in Syria, and other parts of the world. So Africa is also one place where they think that they can do well. They obviously believe that there is a vacuum in the African continent and they are trying to take advantage of it. Obviously, yes, there is a lot to get from Africa. Africa continues to be one of the richest continents in the world. And the incursions that have been made by other countries have not just been Russia alone. You now have even countries that never really considered Africa as a place of strategic importance are now beginning to cut Africa. You have the Turkish, of course, the French have always been here. The British have always been here. And then the Americans, of course. At the time it was a place of a geopolitical interest, especially during the Cold War, when they wanted to keep the Russians at bay or the Soviet Union at bay. But right now, as the mineral resources all over the world continues to dwindle, Africa continues to have it in abundance. And that's why they have shown interest. And for Russia, like I said, they have seen a vacuum and realized that they can actually, play also in the African continent. And they have begun to do it. And then they have been rewarded in terms of the loyalty some African countries have been, giving to them. Of course, during the Ukraine war, you can see how it went at the level of the United Nations when countries had to vote either to condemn Russia, to uphold Russia. You know that Africa was divided. There was no consensus among African countries. So that was a clear indication that the Russians had penetrated, Africa, the continent to some extent, and that they have some loyalties here and there. And that is because they have been involved in the continent for quite, at least in the past 8-10 years. They have shown much more interest in Africa and actually have boots on ground by proxy. Talking about the Wagner Group, now called the Africa Corps.
Will that influence include Nigeria? Because we've heard different comments and opinions, especially what recently happened in the north during the End Bad Governance protests, where we saw some youths raising the Russian flag. And some people have raised different concerns, saying, is this some form of infiltration of the West, Russia, into the country?
Well, you can't rule that out, obviously. And if Russia has a foothold in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, as we have seen, then there is nothing that stops them from looking at the big one, and the big one is Nigeria. But that is going to be a completely different thing. Because our relationship, our engagement with Russia has not been as deep as that of the United States, even Britain. Obviously, there was a time that I think they were involved in trying to build the biggest steel company in Africa, that is the Ajokuta Steel. That did not see the light of day and continues to be mired in controversy. So if they can have a foothold, a bigger foothold in Nigeria, they're one of the most important countries in the continent. Why not? They will try. I can't say so much about the Russian flag, whether it was just a few people that decided to hoist it in order to spite Nigeria because of Nigeria's problem with the Niger Republic that has obviously gone towards the Russian side. But all the same, it is something that with the Russian government has responded adequately, that they have nothing to do with it. But you never know. In the world of international politics, all kinds of subterranean events take place beyond what people see.
I'd like to... Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, sir. Now, I'd just like to bring it back to the studio a bit because I want to ask you, sir, how you think the regional cooperation can be strengthened within the African countries, particularly using ECOWAS, to manage the flow of refugees, to reduce the number of IDPs, and to prevent further destabilization within the region?
I think the first thing to do is to respect the territorial integrity of all member nations. Interference is what cost us Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Before now, the ECOWAS leaders, for selfish reasons, were trying to create laws like there should be no coup and all that. And obviously, it wasn't because they had democracy in mind, but only because they wanted to perpetuate themselves and, so that they would have something to back up whatever their selfish reasons were. So, as we say in pidgin English, their motives not pure, So we must stop interfering. We didn't handle Niger very well, and we spoke about it here at the time as well. So I think first, let's stop interfering, respect the territorial integrity of individual nations, know that each one is coming as equal partners. Secondly, I heard our Chief of Defense Staff talking about regional force or body that should come together so they can fight, insurgency. And I'm asking, so what happened all these years? We were able to come together with ECOMOG to fight, internal crises in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, earlier on. So why didn't we do that all this while? Because we had common enemies. This is insurgents that were coming in, obviously from outside, some from within, obviously. Boko Haram was internal to Nigeria, but, the ones that were coming in, the, ISIS, ISWAP, and the rest of them were external. And I expect that before now, they should have come together with a regional body, a regional force, and not wait for the French or Wagner for that matter.
Does ECOMOG still exist? I thought it was disbanded.
If it was disbanded, it's the same body, the same ECOWAS. They could have called it any other thing, So then it was a monitoring group. That's what the MOG was about, yes. You understand? So it could have been named anything. They come with experience. As a matter of fact, globally, we were the first regional body to be able to form, a force like that to protect the region or, a country in the region from disintegrating. Other sub-regions were, emulating. They were learning from what we did, and they were commending us for what we did. So it's either a situation where we had bad leaders that took over from those visionary leaders, and so those ones couldn't see the need to come together as one. So there's a need for us. What binds us together is stronger than what separates us. If you look at what happened in Cameroon, where people are divided along not their local languages, but foreign languages, Francophone and Anglophone. Today you're talking about Ambazonians wanting to leave, the Anglophone side of Cameroon. Yes. They even within the country, they live among themselves like enemies. It's the same thing in the West, in the sub-region here as well. We begin to look at Francophone and Anglophone. And whereas you go to Seme, the border between Nigeria and Benin, right up to Togo, we have languages that are common. If you go to the Adamawa province, you find languages that are common across into Cameroon and the rest. Go up north, the same thing. So I think that just to answer this question very quickly, there's a need for our leaders to to be able to say that these threats, external threats, if we see ourselves as a region, then we see these incursions as external threats, as posing existential threats to all of us as a people, not to them as individuals, as individual presidents. We must therefore form a force this time to be able to tackle them at whatever border, wherever they are. You know, that's where, yeah.
We'll have to wrap up. Let's take this final one from Achike Chude in Abuja. Well, talking about tackling these issues, what do you think is the role of ECOWAS? Recently, we saw the call by President Bola Tinubu to Niger and some other, Mali and some other African countries to come back to the fold. What do you think this would do in reducing this crisis that we have on our hands, the refugee crisis?
Obviously, ECOWAS has always been for integration in Africa, unity of, especially in West Africa, unity of West African countries, because they had a common, and they still have a common objective, monetary union, political fusion to some level and all that. But unfortunately, the events of the past few months have shown, great division. It is going to be difficult for ECOWAS to get those countries back because the interests are not just local interests, the interest of the three countries that we are talking about, but there is also the foreign element also that they also have to contend with. So that is the problem that ECOWAS is facing. I am not exactly sure. And then if we talk about maybe the responses of ECOWAS, I mean, like my colleague in the studio, is saying, he's absolutely right. But we must not forget that this is a different era. The political actors are different. Their motivations are different. The resources of these African countries are not what they used to be before. And so Africa, West Africa, finds itself mired in all kinds of socio-economic contradictions. They do not have the pool that they used to have at the time. And the enemy is not a conventional enemy. It's also an enemy that is being funded internationally. So, of course, I agree that we need some level of concerted effort. And we've had this concerted effort even before now. Some of these countries in West Africa have been pulling resources together before now, engaging with their armies involved in tackling the insurgents together. But that exactly has not worked. So I guess that ECOWAS needs to do much more. And, they also need to learn how to look before they leap. Because we all know that what is happening with ECOWAS right now, with the division, is unprecedented. It has not happened. And I think it is as a result of the way it was handled, perhaps lack of experience or maturity, and then we now have this situation where ECOWAS is gravely divided. But the reality really is that this division does not do those countries that left, any good. With the presence of French and American, troops on ground in those countries, they were not able to stem the tide of terrorism. We still had terrorist attacks. With the Wagner group also, the terrorist attacks have continued. So there has to be a way. And I think that way has to be found by African political leaders. People have made this argument that Africa, that foreigners cannot save Africa unless Africa saves itself. And so we need to guide our loins and show a greater level of commitment. I believe that we still have what it takes to liberate Africa, and not continue to blame outside forces for the wars that we are facing.
Definitely, sir. Definitely, sir. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Achike Chude and Mr. Okhai. Thank you for joining us on Newsday today. Your insight has been invaluable, as always.